Hello guys, welcome to session 21 of Java Full Stack Made Easy. So this is session number 21. I have put up a lot of effort to continue this series, and if you share this series with others, then it will encourage me to create more such content. So as a new YouTuber, obviously I would like more subscriber to be joining my channel so that it encourages me to create more content and keeps me interested doing all these stuffs. So anyways, without wasting much of the time, let's get back to the topics that we were discussing in the previous session. We talked about the exceptions, and we have seen that exception is an abnormal situation occurring during the program execution and terminates the flow of a program. And we talked about what are checked exception, what are unchecked exception in details. Also, I told you if you know these 5 keywords, you are done with exception handling. So out of which we have already discussed these 3 keywords, that is try, catch, and finally. So the last 2 keywords we will discuss in this session, and after that we will move to other topics. So for completion of this exception handling techniques, we are left with only 2 new keywords, that is throw and the throws. So let's go ahead and understand what exactly a throw keyword does and what exactly a throws keyword does. So about the throws, in the previous session also we have discussed that it redirects the exception to the caller. In this session we will see what exactly we are talking about when we say that it redirects the exception to the caller. So I'll just clean up everything that I have written in the previous session so that it becomes easy for us to understand the new topic. Alright, so I again have a clean code wherein I'll get into my main method and I'll say system.out.println once again, and this is my line 1, and here you notice what I'm trying to do. I'll say throw new file not found. So why am I throwing a file not found exception? I'll tell you that. Okay, and what happens also I'll tell you that. See here, when I'm throwing a exception system.out.println, I will write a line 3. So there is a problem on line 2, which is I'm trying to throw a file not found exception. So file not found exception is not a unchecked exception, it is a checked exception. If you remember in the previous session itself, I have told you that checked exception must be handled by us. We have to handle it because compiler is going to throw us an exception if we don't. Compiler is going to throw us an error if we don't handle the checked exception. So if I go to the repository, you will find out in one of the comments I have already discussed about that. So let's go here and let me give you this. Yeah, type of exceptions is something where we discussed about the checked and the unchecked exception. So this is the point which I was talking about. You must handle them, that is the checked exception must be handled using try catch, or we can declare even the throws keyword as discussed just now. That in the previous session we have already discussed about the throws keyword, meaning we are redirecting the exception to the caller. Okay, so if we do not handle this exception, at that time the compiler is going to throw us an error. So this is a checked exception. If I am not handling it, the compiler is going to throw me an error. So I'll comment this once again. Let's check what happens if we throw a unchecked exception. So what is unchecked exception? In the previous session itself, we have seen an arithmetic exception is an unchecked exception. So you notice that whenever I'm throwing a unchecked exception, the compiler is not giving me an error here. But yes, for this line, the compiler is giving me an error saying that it is a unreachable line of code. That's because you're throwing an exception here. When an exception is thrown, the program gets terminated. So once the program is getting terminated here itself, why are you writing this line 3, right? Correct? So if I surround this line of code that throws me an exception with a try block, then you notice that this unreachable code is gone, because now my program knows that I'm trying to handle it. So obviously it goes to a catch block and then it comes down to this line 3, right? So the main agenda to show you about this throwing an arithmetic exception and throwing a file not found exception is not to teach you about checked or unchecked exception. It is about to teach you throw keyword raises an exception. So the moment you write a throws keyword, at that line of code, an exception will be thrown. So meaning you can either throw a checked exception or you can throw a unchecked exception. Now you might say, as a programmer, why would I want to throw an exception, right? Why would a programmer like to throw an exception in his code? The question, if that question comes into your mind, you're 100% going on the track. Now, why would a programmer? 100%. Yes, a programmer will never want to throw an exception. But imagine a situation where I'm creating an application for a school. Okay, so it's a school management system where a teacher is entering the marks of a student. And when a teacher is entering a marks of a student, I don't want the marks to be negative. Neither I want the marks to be more than 100, because here there is no negative marking. Also, there is no extra marks for good handwriting. Okay, so there's nothing like that. My valid range of marks is from 0 to 100. Anything entered other than that should be an exception. It's an exceptional case. Anything that is entered above that value, then I don't want to accept it, right? So in such case, I have to throw an exception itself. Now, Java does not give me any exception called as invalid marks entry exception, right? Java does not give me that exception because Java does not know that after some years I will come up and create a software for a school, and there I will encounter a situation like invalid marks entry, right? So Java cannot imagine what software can be created. So in situations like this, you need to create your own exceptions because Java does not provide you that exception. If such thing is not there in Java, Java tells you that you create your custom exception, right? So let us now create a custom exception and throw the exception, right? So you know that here you are using a throw keyword. A throw keyword is used to create, or you can say a throw keyword is used to raise an exception. So let me write that here for a better understanding. Throw is used to raise an exception. Till now everything looks good. So just I'll put this into the comment section for you. I'll put this so that you can understand. What you guys do is you just uncomment this line of code and understand that the exception is being raised. Comment this, comment the try and catch, and then check what is happened. Okay, so I'll put this as a comment. I'll put this under a comment. You try and uncomment one line of code and then understand what happens if you uncomment this piece of code or this block of code. You try that. What happens when you throw a checked exception and when you throw a unchecked exception. So for unchecked exception, we are not getting any compilation error. Whereas if I throw a checked exception, at that time I'm going to get a, see, if I comment this line, I'll get a compilation error. Although that's the last line, there is no unreachable code. Here it says that unhandled exception, type file not found exception. So you must handle it or declare a throws with it. Okay. So I hope now by this example you got to know what exactly a throw keyword does for us. So throw keyword is used to throw or raise a exception. So this is our demo 1 for day 21, demo 1, throw. So now what I want is I am creating an application where somebody is going to enter the marks for the student. So let's create the application that way. So what I will do is I'll create, first of all, what type of exception has to be thrown if marks are invalid? Invalid marks entry exception has to be thrown. Do we have an invalid marks entry with us? No, we don't have. So what we have to do is we have to create a custom exception for that. So what is the name? Invalid marks exception. So every exception class ends with exception. So that's what I'm following here. Done. If you remember in the previous session, I told you about all the child classes of exception are checked exception and child class of runtime exception are unchecked exception. So you can choose to make your class either a checked exception or unchecked exception just by deriving that class from either an exception or a runtime exception. So here I want to create it as a checked exception. So that's why what I'm doing is I'm saying extends exception. Okay. If you just create a class like this, then also you have created a custom exception. That's it. You created a class that inherits all the behavior of an exception. So your class has become a exception class. No problem at all. But what I want is I want to enhance it a bit. If I want to give any message, a get message, you can give that message, right? So what I will do here is just understand what I'm doing here. See, I'm creating a constructor. Okay. So I am creating a constructor with an argument here. A constructor with argument is created. Now, if I create a constructor with argument in any class, a default constructor will not be present, right? So whenever somebody is creating the object of this invalid marks and marks exception, they have to call this constructor itself, right? Now you see what I'm doing on line 1. So line 1, by default there will be super, right? By default it is there. But what I'm doing here, I am calling a super constructor from parent class exception class, has a constructor that takes a string argument. So that is what I am calling here. And after calling that, I am passing whatever message is passed here. Okay, that's what I'm doing. This is optional. I may do it or may not do it, but it is a standard practice what we generally follow while creating custom exceptions. So I hope you have got to know how to create a custom exception. So a simple exception I have created, invalid marks entry exception, extends an exception class. So by saying extends exception, it inherits all the behavior of the exception. We are done creating a custom exception. So what I will do is, in this exception stuff, I'll remove everything that I have done, exception demo. And then now notice what I am doing here. I'll create one more class that is for marks. Okay, let's call this as a class exam. Okay, and for that class exam, I have a void marks entry, and this marks entry will actually take the marks from the user, and it will check if the marks are greater than 100 or the marks are less than 0. At that time, throw new invalid marks exception. So if we can throw an invalid marks exception, it means that we have successfully created a exception. Now you can see unhandled exception type invalid marks exception. It is telling me that unhandled exception. That means we have successfully created a invalid marks exception. If suppose I remove this extends exception from here, so first of all, the object class does not have anything with that text string. So when I do this, when I save this, you can see that now there is an error, and that error is not unhandled exception. It says no exception of type invalid marks exception can be thrown, because it's not a exception now. Only exceptions can be thrown. So just by extending your class with an exception makes it a exception. So now it is unhandled. Now I am creating this exception. Have I entered the marks here? I have not entered the marks here. Who is going to enter the marks? Somebody who is going to create the instance of this exam, they will enter the marks, right? So I don't want to handle this exception here. I want the exception to be handled by the caller. So if I want the exception is created, but I want the exception to be handled by the caller. So at that time, what I write is, I write a throws. That means this method is throwing invalid marks exception. So this invalid marks exception, whenever somebody is calling this method, they have to handle that exception. You notice that the moment I write this throws keyword, the error is gone. So you can see it here. So whenever a checked exception is written, either we have to handle it using a try and catch, or we can declare it to be thrown. That means we can redirect it to the caller. So what I have chosen here is I'm redirecting it to the caller. I'm not handling it here. So if at all this marks has happened, this thing has happened, if marks are greater than 100 or marks are less than 0, then what should happen is I'm passing a message here. uh, invalid marks entered, please check. So this is the message. What happens is this message actually goes here, right? This constructor is called, this message goes here, and that message is calling super message. That means exception has a message. This has a constructor that takes one string argument. So I'm calling a parent class constructor and passing this message there, so that if I do a e.get message, I'm going to get this message there. So let's save it. If not, in an else case, what should happen is system.out.println, you have scored plus the marks. Okay, marks. So this way we can create a custom exception is created and custom exception is utilized. Now comes the end user. So it is kind of a publisher and subscriber model. I'm publishing that exception. Now the subscriber comes up and he has to utilize that exception. So somebody is trying to enter the marks. So they'll create the instance of exam is equal to new exam, and now they are entering the marks for the student. So exam dot enter marks entry. So somebody is entering the marks like let's say whatever marks they enter, like 12, 13, 14, whatever. But you notice that the moment somebody is calling this marks entry, whenever I put my cursor here, it says unhandled exception, type invalid marks exception. That's because it is a checked exception, has to be handled. If it was an unchecked exception, like if I extend it from runtime, at that time you notice it is not going to give me that error. See, the error is gone. So that's what we discussed yesterday. If it is a checked exception, you have to handle it. Compiler is going to throw you an error for it. If it is an unchecked exception, it is kind of a bug in your program. You may or may not handle it, but it is recommended to handle. So I am creating a checked exception by inheriting just from the exception class. So because it is a checked exception, what happens is it starts giving me an error. So I have to put this under a try and catch block. So let's surround this with a try and catch block. And inside the catch block, instead of doing a e.print stack trace and all that, that actually tells me what class, what line, everything it tells me. I just want to get a system.out.println e.get message. So that's what I want to do. Let's save it. 12 marks are correct. So when I run this, it tells me you have scored 12 marks. So this method is giving me that. If suppose I enter 120 marks, which is invalid. So when I run this, we are going to get an exception. When an exception occurs, it goes to the catch block and then it says invalid marks entered, please check. So you can see that it has come to the catch block. So catch block, save it, run it. So you see that it has come to the catch block. So now in this entire demonstration, what we have done is we have created a custom exception and we have applied the custom exception, and it is acting like an exception because we have surrounded it with a try and catch block, right? So let's start it right from the beginning. What I did at the beginning, second class and the third class. So the first class invalid marks entry, what I have done is pretty much simple, straightforward thing. I have created a custom exception. How did I create a custom exception? Just I created a class that extends an exception. That means all the behavior of this parent is inherited by the child. So it becomes a exception class. Simple. Then I'm creating a constructor. It is optional. You may or may not create it. Okay. If you create it, well and good. If you don't, then that is fine. But this is the standard that we generally follow in real world programming. So that we can, like, whenever an exception is thrown, somebody has to give the message and that message goes to the parent of exception. Okay. So this way you create the custom exceptions. And then in the second class, what I have simply done is I am throwing that exception. There is some condition, on that condition I am throwing that exception. On what condition? If the entered marks is greater than 100 or less than 0, at that time I am throwing that exception. And I am giving the message. This is the message for the exception. If an exception is raised, this message has to be given. So I am raising an exception and I don't want to handle that exception. It is like if you own a restaurant, you cook the food and you consume the food, right? You don't do that. You cook the food, you let your client consume that food. So that's what we are doing here. Publisher and subscriber model. We are creating an exception, but that exception will be handled by the end user. So here I am raising an exception by using a throw keyword, and by using a throws keyword I am redirecting that exception. That means whoever calls this marks entry method has to handle this exception that I am throwing, that is invalid marks exception. I don't want to handle it here, I want the end user to handle. So that's why an exception has to be handled here and an exception is handled here for our marks entry. And if no exception occurs, like if the marks is 12, then try block gets executed and it gives me the result. And if any problem occurs here, then an exception is raised. So we know that when an exception is raised, it goes to a catch block and then protects the program from being terminated. So this way we do the things. If suppose we know that exception can terminate the flow of a program, right? So this marks entry can terminate the flow of a program if it is not handled. How is that? Let's see that. So I'll go here and I'll do a runtime exception, because if it is unchecked exception, then it is not mandatory to handle the exception, right? So it's not mandatory now. So I write a system.out.println. Now no exception will be raised now, right? So line 3. Exception will be raised, but when I save and run this, you notice that my program is terminated. It is not printing me line 3 because an exception is raised. If the exception is not raised at that time, obviously that line 3 will be executed. You see that line 3 is executed. You have scored 12 marks and line 3 is also executed. So what we have actually done is we have created an exception, and we can create any type of exception. It can be runtime, that means it can be an unchecked exception. If it is extending from exception, it is a checked exception. So I hope it is clear to you what checked exceptions are, what unchecked exceptions are. And in this example, I have shown you what a throw keyword does. Throw keyword is used to raise an exception, and what a throws keyword does. Throws keyword redirects the exception to the caller. That means this method marks entry throws an exception, invalid marks exception, but I am not handling it here. So whoever calls the marks entry exception has to handle this exception. Hope this is clear to you. I will put this into the repository for you. So let's save everything. So here we go. Now it is an exception, so it must be caught or declared to be thrown. So I will just put the try and catch block back to it how it was. So this way we handle the exception. So let me share everything one by one with you. So this is my demo 2. Custom exception. So here is the custom exception I created. Similarly, I will create another class which upon a condition it is throwing an exception. And finally, the client, that is the end user who is handling the exception. I can create any type of exception. It can be a checked or a unchecked. How do we decide whether it is checked exception or unchecked exception? Based on what the class is extending. If the class is extending just an exception, it is a checked exception. If a class is extending runtime or any of its child, then it is unchecked exception. So let me give you one more example for the custom exception, and after that we will be done with the custom exception. It is an easiest thing. Nothing extraordinary will be done when you are creating custom exceptions and you are dealing with a custom exception. Two new keywords will be used, throw and throws. That too not for creating an exception, that is for using the created exception. Creating exception is just extending the class from an exception class. So now what we are going to think of is, we'll create a custom exception, and that will be for what? Let's say a banking application, where if a user is trying to withdraw the amount and if the amount is not sufficient in his account, at that time we are going to throw a insufficient funds exception. So that's what I'm thinking. That would be more realistic. Now also I have given you a realistic example itself, where we were creating a marks entry type of software where a student's marks are entered. Here now we are thinking of a banking system where a user is going to withdraw the money. If the money is more than what his balance is, at that time we are throwing an exception called as insufficient funds exception. So let's now create that exception step by step, same as what we have created before. So you also think of it, and if it will be well and good if you follow along with me. So what would be the first step that we are going to follow? We have to create a custom exception. So what is the name of that exception? Insufficient funds exception, right? Insufficient funds exception. So this is what I'm thinking of. It is a very good practice if you end it with an exception, because in your application also you will come to know that it is an exception class that you have created. So always do that. And you can also have a package called as exceptions and put that all the custom exceptions into a exception package itself, so that in your software you understand if there is any problem with a custom exception, you can go to that package and handle those exceptions. So now we know that to make this as an exception class, it has to extend any of the exception class. If it is a checked one, directly exception. If it is unchecked, then runtime. So let's extend it from the runtime now. In the previous example, we have already created a checked exception, right? So let's create a unchecked exception now. So I want what? I would like to add a constructor using field. Runtime with a string. Okay, so it has created all the constructors for me. I just want one constructor, a custom one that takes a string message, because the parent class contains all those constructors. That's why it has called up all the constructors. String message, and just I want to call the super with one string argument, that is message. So let's save it. So we are done creating an exception now. Exception is created. So what we have done is we have created a custom exception, and we are thinking of throwing this exception when the user is trying to withdraw the amount which is more than his current balance. So let's create a class that would be bank account. I think I already have created something called as a bank account as an abstract class, right? So I will, somewhere I have created a bank account. Banking service is there, and a bank account is also there. So what I will do is bank account new is something I will create, okay, or my bank account or something I'll create. My bank account. So this also means what? In one package you never create two classes with the same name. Don't create that. It will not allow you to create it. First of all, don't create it. Okay, so I have a my bank account. So within this particular class, my bank account, I'm going to create a account number and a balance as the field. So fields has to be private, we know that. So let's create it that way, private. Account number, I'll give a string account number, or I can give it as an integer account number depending upon the account numbers that I'm going to store. And then what? Private int amount. Okay, so if the amount is like 10.50 and all, at that time you take it as double. As for now, I don't have that, so that's why I'm directly creating it this way. So let's create a constructor. Now constructor using field is something which I need here, so that this thing can be initialized directly. That is, the account number and the amount should be initialized whenever the instance of this my bank account is created. Now coming to the main part, that is withdrawal of the money, where I want to throw an exception if the balance is less than the withdrawn amount. Okay, so let's create it that way. Public void withdraw. And now this withdraw method, we know that it is going to throw an exception. Which exception it is going to throw? Insufficient funds exception, and I don't want to handle it here. This exception has to be handled when a withdraw method is being called, not when the withdraw method is being created. So whenever somebody is trying to withdraw the amount, at that time that exception has to be checked and should be thrown. That's what we are thinking of. So let's perform a throws insufficient funds exception. So at what point it has to be thrown? It has to be thrown if the amount is more than the balance. So if the amount that we have entered is more than the balance amount. So we have created, we have not created anything called as balance here, right? So we have just created it as amount. Let's create it as balance. And while withdrawing, you have to give some amount here. So let's create it as amount. And if the amount is greater than the balance amount, then the exception has to be thrown. Then just to throw an exception, we know that throw new insufficient funds exception. And the message which I would like to give is not enough balance. So on YouTube I'm being a bit formal, so generally when I'm giving these type of examples to my students at that time, like beggar check your account and such type of jokes I make, so that I keep people awake in the classroom. Here I'm just being a more formal, so that a larger audience sees these videos, so need to be much bit more formal. So I'm checking amount is greater than balance or what. If the amount is greater than balance while withdrawing the amount, at that time the exception has to be thrown and it has to give a message as not enough balance. Now if not, then what has to happen? If not, then just simply say what balance is equal to balance minus the amount. So balance minus equal to amount, balance minus amount. So most of the time I'm using this operator, that is arithmetic assignment operator. So at the time of assignment only, it is performing an arithmetic operation, that is it is subtracting the amount. So that should happen. And after that, let's give a message to the user system.out.println. So let's tell the user the remaining balance. So you withdraw this much amount and this much is remain. That's what I want to just print it as a message after a withdrawal has happened. So let's say you draw rupees, the amount, your current balance is the balance. Okay, so we are done with the withdrawal function, right? So this will do withdrawal, and this dot amount is equal to amount. Why is this giving me an error? Sorry, that is because I created it before. So this amount has to be balance. Let's make it balance. This should also be balance. Sorry, balance. All good. Now I want to perform a deposit as well. So outside this method, let's go and do a deposit. That is, take the amount from the user and increment the balance. Whatever is there in the balance, you just add the amount entered by the user into the balance. So let's say public void deposit, and when I'm performing a deposit, let the user give me the amount, int amount, and that amount will be added to my balance. So balance plus is equal to amount, that is balance is equal to balance plus amount. Okay, and after that also I just like to give some message saying that this much amount is deposited in your account and this is the balance. So I'll just copy this and put it here. You deposited rupees this amount, your current balance is the balance. So I'm done with this particular class. Now let's go ahead and create a customer class. That means a class where we will deposit the amount and we will try to withdraw the amount. So let's save it and let's create a banking service. New class, let's call it as my banking service. That will have a main method as well. So in this my banking service, now you notice that I'm actually creating what? I'm creating a unchecked exception. So whenever it is an unchecked exception, I will not be forced to handle that exception. Okay, so let's create a instance of my bank account. Account is equal to new my bank account. So the bank account number, let's give it as ICICI 1234. That's the account number. Some XYZ account number we can give. So the amount that will be added to my balance by default is going to be 5,000 or 6,000 or whatever I want. Then what I want to do is I want to withdraw the amount. So let's say account dot withdraw. So when I'm trying to withdraw 6,000 rupees, obviously it has to throw me an exception. But you notice that when I'm writing account dot withdraw, it's not giving me any error. It's not asking me that this particular method might throw an exception, surround it with a try and catch block, else your program gets terminated. It is not showing me that. So system.out.println, I'll say thank you. visit again, something like that. So in this case, what happens is if I run this piece of code, program gets terminated. You notice that the program is getting terminated because it is an unchecked exception. It's a programming bug is what it is showing, right? So I will better create, instead of a runtime exception, I can create a checked exception that will force me to handle the exception. Okay, so it is your choice whether you want to create an unchecked exception or a checked exception. The choice will be yours. So in this case, obviously, if I create an unchecked exception, if the exception occurs, at that time my program gets terminated, but I can still handle this exception. It is not mandatory for me to leave it like this. So I can just handle the exception like try and put a catch. So what type of exception it is? I can also use a common catch block. My common catch block still has the capability to handle that exception because that is the exception that I have created, insufficient funds exception, is a child of exception itself. So instead of creating a common catch block, let's create a specific one. And let's say once an exception is raised, so we'll just say system.out.println. We'll try and get a message from that. e.get message or e.print stack trace will also work for us. And then we will just say thank you and all that. So let's save it, and I'm trying to perform. I have the balance as 5,000 and I'm trying to withdraw 6,000. So that should actually come to the cash block and it should tell me the message insufficient funds in your account. So let's run it and it says not enough balance. Thank you. Visit again. So an exception is raised, and yeah, again in an exception, if you see, it's not showing me the details here. Not enough balance is what it is showing me. If I want to print the balance, current balance, here also I can print the current balance so that the user gets to know what is his balance, right? So let's put that your current balance is the balance so that the user gets to know what balance he has. Let's run it. It says not enough balance. Your current balance is 5,000. We are trying to withdraw 6,000, right? So an exception, it shows me that. If I try to withdraw something like 3,000 or something, at that time it will withdraw the amount and it will tell me what amount I have withdrawn and what will be the remaining one, not 300. So I supposed to write it as 3,000. So 3,000 I am withdrawing, 2,000 is the balance. I have withdrawn 3,000 and the current balance is 2,000. So that way we can create custom exceptions and utilize the custom exceptions here. Fine. So the conclusion to all these things is that to create any custom exception, what we can do is we can extend it from either a runtime or an exception or any child of an exception. So if we create the custom exception by extending from the exception or any child of exception which is checked exception, so a checked exception will be created. If I create it from runtime exception or any child of this runtime exception, at that time it will become a unchecked exception. We already know what is checked exception, what is unchecked. For checked exception, we have to handle it. For unchecked exception, it is optional to handle because that is a programming bug. Now, next point is that we created this exception, a custom exception is created. Now, the next thing was about raising an exception. So, when raising an exception, two keywords comes into picture, the throws keyword and the throw keyword. So, a throw keyword is used to raise an exception, whereas a throws keyword is used to redirect the exception to the caller. Okay, and finally we can handle that exception by using a try and catch block. Fine. So I hope this example is also clear, and it is pretty much clear to you where to create exception, how to create custom exceptions, and how to make use of a throw keyword, how to make use of a throws keyword. Demo 3, custom exception. So this is my exception for insufficient funds, my bank account, and lastly the banking service. Hope you are enjoying this series, and you'll continue to watch this series, and obviously in upcoming sessions we will deal with more and more complicated topics. That means more advanced topics, not complicated, more advanced topic we will talk about, and we will see how things go there. And I hope till now. So custom exception, what did I do? Did I commit it? No. Okay, let's create the file. Let's call it as demo 3 custom exception. Yeah, so I was talking about the other sessions, the upcoming sessions where we will talk about the important concepts in Java, like Java 8 features. We will talk about collections. We will talk about Java threads and all. So we'll be talking more advanced topics about Java, and after that we'll come to the UI. We'll talk about the JDBC concepts, then UI, then we will go with the SQL and all those things. Fine. Up till we combine all the three layers of our application development. So what you can simply do is you encourage me to create more such videos by sharing these videos to your friends, and remember, if you share these videos to your friends, nobody is going to take your knowledge from you. Okay, so there are some people in the world who are like, if he also learns from this source, then I will lose my value, so he might get a job and I might not get a job. If that was the thinking, if that is what you are thinking, if that's what I think, in that case I should not be creating this videos, and you should never be sharing those videos. So we'll live in a world without any information. So the more information you share with the world, the better you will learn that subject. So always be kind to the world and always try to pay back to what you have. Anyways, so that's it from my end in this particular session. So in the upcoming sessions, stay tuned. We will enjoy this series. So please comment on the videos for better reach, like and share it. And if there is any doubt, you can always reach out to me in the comment section, or maybe on my LinkedIn account. So you can DM me there or anything. So whenever I get the time, I'm gonna respond to you. So thank you, good luck, and see you in the next video.